Hi there. My name is Lois Abbott. I'm with Safe Families Tallahassee. And in today's training session, we will be covering initial contact with parents as well as how to maintain an empowerment mindset when working with families. So I'm going to go ahead and pray for us and then we'll get started. Father God, I pray that you would help to prepare us to come alongside families that are facing challenges and isolation. I pray that we would that you would soften our hearts, that we would be quick to recognize the ways that this can be a challenge from both sides, and that you would just help us to extend grace and to be gracious with ourselves as well when we mess up. We know that we rely on your strength and you working through us rather than on our own qualifications. And so I pray that that would put us at peace to move forward in your work. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So as we get started, one of the questions that often comes up with as people are embarking on volunteering with Safe Families is, what does it look like to work with parents? What are some of the issues that they're facing? How do we engage? And so we're going to start with a short little clip that talks about just that, what to expect when working with a child's biological family. So, all right, here we go.
A question that comes up a lot is, well, what about the real parent, the biological parent? I mean, what if I'm dealing with somebody that's on drugs or somebody that's been in prostitution or has been violent? I mean, this is kind of hard. You're asking me to consider a kid, but the kid doesn't come alone. The kid's got baggage, and that baggage still lives a few miles away. What do I do? Well, that's all true. I mean, there'd be no need for safe families if there weren't people in trouble and families in trouble. So what about them? Well, let's talk about a couple things. First is that you're getting ready to go on a journey. And journeys involve getting out the boat like Peter did and, walking in the water. And there's a faith aspect to it where there is an unknown because you're dealing with people that are struggling. But honestly, as a psychologist, I don't know anybody who really enjoys life without unknowns. My goal is not to slide safely into home base, not having had a risk. That's a crummy life. I'd rather say I'm going to try something new because that's what faith is and that's what God is. But the other part of that is think about the nature of love. I know we've been talking about love a lot in our trainings, but think about the nature of love for a second. If the only people you love are really lovable people, then your love's sort of like, shallow Kool-Aid. I mean, really, God loved us in our unrighteousness, as the scriptures tell us, and it was not easy for him. And as we know, it had a great cost in the person of Jesus. So people that really want to say, I'm a loving person, they've got to be able to get out of their comfort zone and love people that have had big difficulties, behavioral problems, attitude problems, addiction problems, spiritual problems, character problems. That's where you find out what you're made of, and that's where you expand your capacities. And the most loving people in the world are those that reach out and love people that really have nothing to offer. So look at it this way. Look at this mantra. Lovability is irrelevant. How lovable that person is, how cuddly they are, how, whatever their socioeconomic status is, and the amount of times they've not been in jail, that's really irrelevant. But there's another piece to this. There are a lot of fear aspects of doing anything unknown. And it's funny, there's some research that says that 85% of the things that we're afraid of never come true. If you're afraid of, gosh, what if I don't like them? I don't get along with them. What if they give us a hard time? We found out, fortunately, with Safe Families, there's been enough field research and enough examples that we're doing extensive kind of like understanding what's going on. The opposite happens. You fall in love with the mother. You fall in love with the father. And I'll tell you why that's true. It's true because you see a little girl in them, and you see a little boy in them that might have been abused, that might have come from a a nightmare family that never knew what love felt like or what being held felt like, but now they're 19, 20, 21, and they don't have anywhere close to the capacities they need. And you fall in love with that person who needs help, just like that 6-year-old, that 5-year-old needs help. How can you not love someone like that? So don't worry about the fears. The system is there. It takes care of things. And we found that your heart will open up to not only that child, but somebody who's hurting just as much as that child. And you'll make a difference with that child inside an adult's body.
So at the point that I'm recording this version of the training, I'm not sure if I've shared this with you already, but it definitely bears repeating. And it is a point of training that has stuck with me more than perhaps any other, which is the fact that when it comes to, say, families, we often go back to the Bible verse that talks about how we as Christians are called to care for the widows and the orphans and the vulnerable people in our communities. And we, not all the families that we are interacting with are widowed, like fall into the category of widows or whatever. But what is true is that, and they certainly don't fall into orphan because parents are present, right? But what is true is the fact that, by and large, the families that come to us, the orphans in these situations, are the parents. They're the ones without the family and the support that they need to move forward. Because we don't just need our families when we're small, we need that support. And God's given us the gift of family throughout our lives, right? We depend on them. So I just always come back to that realization that in these cases, the children have parents. It's the parents who are often needing that care and the love, so that they can be brought into family and aren't feeling the effects of brokenness and kind of this orphan status of not having family support. So this is a little bit of a recap from a previous session where we talked about the needs of parents. By and large, one of the greatest common denominators for families that seek support through safe families is this concept of social isolation. They may be experiencing an acute crisis or situation that's become overwhelming, but the majority of parents report that social isolation is their underlying factor that drives them to become involved in safe families. It's also really common for us to see nationally homelessness as another underlying factor for involvement in safe families. This might look like living in your car or at a homeless shelter. Oftentimes, though, it also looks like couch hopping. So maybe staying at a friend or a family member's house and but lacking stability or safety in that situation. And that can particularly be unsafe and unstable for children, because there might be other people in the home that are not safe or reliable, or pose an additional threat. And then there's oftentimes medical or health challenges that families are facing, and we want to be mindful of that. With any of these situations, family, friends like you are not expected to solve the problem or the situation. You're merely there to help the parent process and think about how to best tackle each of kind of the situations that they're going through, or whatever's most pressing. And over again, we're going to return to the fact that our job primarily is relational and developing healthy relationships and encouraging and supportive relationships. So when it's necessary, we'll refer to other agencies that might have more professional support. And a lot of the families that come to us are already being served through that. So we get to really dig in deep on that relational aspect that caseworkers or professionals are not able to cross that line into friendship. So, when it comes to your initial contact with families, um, some of the key steps that you're going to follow are introducing yourself and beginning to build that relationship. You are probably going to want to go to them to a place that's convenient for them, a place that doesn't feel imposing. So that might look like going to a park or a McDonald's rather than your favorite coffee shop or meeting for lunch. And we really want to make sure that we're putting the parents at ease in that situation, that their comfort is key. And then when you're introducing yourself, especially in the beginning as you're first starting to volunteer, you may feel most comfortable going with an intake specialist or your family coach or another family friend that's going to be working alongside the family. Um, or as you get more experienced, you may begin to feel comfortable going out by yourself, reaching out individually. Um, when it comes to being a family friend, there's a lot of different roles that you might be filling. If you are going to be a family friend who is spending more time with the child or children than with the parent, like perhaps you're providing much needed babysitting, you are going to want to make sure to ask the parent about their child. So, even though when we do our intake, we ask questions about medication and child interests or schedules, it is a great way to show the parent that you value their input, that you are tuned in and really taking seriously this responsibility of caring for their child, and that you want to know more about them. Um, and it's also just a good safety measure to ask about medication or health issues again and ask for tips from the parent on how to connect with the child. Um, we do know that, like I said, these things are often covered in intake, but sometimes they may have forgotten to share a bit of information, or by the time you are involved in volunteering, there's new information to be shared. So it's always a good step. And then um, when it comes to this idea of identifying needs, like we've said, your primary goal is developing relationship. Um, a lot of the time, parents' needs or goals are going to be identified at intake. Um, so, but there are going to be others that you or the family coach will learn about from mom or dad directly, especially as your relationship progresses and they become more confident and comfortable sharing with you, or as new things arise. Um, so, this concept of um, need identification might not happen in your first conversation with the family or your first meeting, but we do hope to have a really good sense of the needs in play within the first couple of weeks. And your family coach will be trained in helping mom or dad identify the greatest needs at that moment and working with them. So they're a great resource to turn to and to be in communication with, especially as things come up. You're also, during your initial contact with families, going to want to establish a schedule for communication. Um, Initially, and this is a schedule for communication both with the parents and with your family coach. So, ideally, we'd like to see you reach out once a week to the family, even if it's not always in person. And especially during those first few weeks, that's really important to establish communication and to show that you are there consistently and wanting to be a consistent part of the picture for them. Um, One of the key things, though, is to just be very clear about expectations and about your abilities. So perhaps you're not able to commit to weekly contact, making sure that your Say Families um, ministry lead or family coach knows that from the beginning so that we can pair you accordingly, and making sure your parents also know how to get a hold of you and how often to expect to hear from you, is really key. It's a big part of establishing trust and that relationship building. And then as we continue to focus on trust and vulnerability, we want to recognize that these relationships, family friending relationships, are asking a lot of parents. We're asking them to open up to us, to share their struggles, their goals, to let us see their mess, and kind of what they're handling. And that's not easy for any of us. It's not easy for us to do with people we know and trust well. And it's certainly not easy to do to strangers. So, one of the things that we encourage our family friends to do is be willing to um, share trust and vulnerability with the families they work with. So, when you reach out to mom or dad, um, as you are comfortable, share some information about yourself. That doesn't have to be your address. It can be more about like what drew you to Safe Families, or a little bit about your family, the stage of parenting that you're in, or the stage of life that you're in. Um, and especially sharing why you volunteer with Safe Families if it relates to your own experiences of feeling overwhelmed as a parent yourself, or facing a time of crisis when your own circle of support really stepped in and was key to handling that situation. Or perhaps you grew up in a difficult home situation, um, and had the benefit of another loving adult in your life that was able to be a support to you or your family. Sharing those experiences helps to normalize this need for help and social connection as we go about this very personal business of parenting our kids. So the more that you're willing to be vulnerable, the easier it will be for a parent to be vulnerable as well. Um, so there are, of course, things that we want to guard against. Imagine you have been matched with your first family and you're excited and you're ready to go, and they don't respond. You've called and you've texted, and you're just not getting much back from the family. Don't panic. All relationships take time, and it's not at all uncommon for parents to be slow or entirely unresponsive. If you're getting no response, your first step is going to be to reach out to your family coach or your ministry lead, and they'll talk to additional Safe Families staff if necessary. A unique aspect of serving as a family friend, particularly when it's not a situation that requires a child to be hosted or cared for in a host home, is that there's no pressure on the parent's side to reach out to us if they don't want to. Perhaps they came to us for help, but now doubt or distrust has slipped in, and we are not caring for their kids, so they're able to you know decide that they didn't want that at that time, or they're not ready, or just take more time to come to us for that relationship. um, and they're oftentimes when hosting is not a part of the equation, the family may be facing real crisis, but is able to struggle on um, for a period of time, even though they're not perhaps thriving. So just remembering that parents' involvement in Safe Families is totally voluntary, and being really respectful of that is going to be key. Um, and maintaining, a certain level of vulnerability and humility that we have as we approach mom and dad. Some parents are going to be super grateful and on board when you're reaching out to them, and some are going to be super skeptical, and some are going to go back and forth. And we just have to hold space for that as volunteers, even though that's hard, because either one really is okay. And likely their own life experiences are going to factor into how you're received by parents, because they bring, as all of us do, a whole host of worries and experiences to the table. We also want to make sure we're guarding against prejudice. Prejudice is a really sneaky thing. It involves preconceived opinions that are not based on reason or actual experience. And they often come from our family of origin and affect our views on race and socioeconomic status, education levels, parenting styles, so much more. The best thing that we can do when it comes to prejudice is not to deny that they exist or try to stuff them away and pretend we're not feeling them, but to identify them and replace them with truth. So, the more we get to know people who are different from ourselves, the more truth we have to replace those prejudices and stereotypes. We can see evidence that they don't hold up. And you can do this through your relationships. You can also do this by um, reading more about people's experiences, especially as it relates to poverty and crisis. And if that's something you're interested in, let us know. The main thing to remember is that everyone is different and made in the image of God and reflect Him uniquely. So we want to always hold that first and foremost in our minds, that this is an image bearer of our Lord, and they are worthy of respect and grace, just like we are. We also want to make sure we're guarding against a rescue mentality. So we encourage all of our volunteers to remember that I am not the Christ. Only Christ is Christ, and it's His job to save people. It's our job to love them and lead them to Christ and encourage them in their faith, and um, and to let God bear out His fruit in our service on His timing. We're also going to guard against negativity and distance. So it can be very hard and even overwhelming as you learn about all the things that mom and dad and kids are facing and dealing with. And it is really common to hit a point in your relationship with families or in your volunteering where that just feels insurmountable and overwhelming. And our natural inclination is to try and put some distance between ourselves and families. The fact that these challenges are so big and so monumental is why families are coming looking for help. And it's also why we don't have volunteers serve in isolation. We want to be using a team approach when it comes to family friends and family coaches and ministry leads, so that as you're walking alongside parents, you are also in community. We'll say it over and over again. We don't want to transfer crisis from their family to yours. We want to put in practice what we're telling parents, which is that having a community of believers, the family of God to surround you, is a gift and a blessing from the Lord, and one that we need to rely on. So just so often these burdens will be too much for one person to carry, but it can feel much more manageable when we're doing it on a team with 3 or 4 people to help carry and share the load. We also really want to guard against unfair expectations. So you will likely get frustrated at some point with the parent's progress or lack thereof. We'll talk more about that. But we want to remember that the key is to make our work about the relationship with mom and dad and the kids. So that change for any of us takes time, And it's also important to remember that the parent may have more obstacles or disadvantages when it comes to tackling these goals and needs than you are recognizing or that they're sharing with you. Things come up, life happens and gets in the way, um, or there may just be um, additional things that, like, say, they're not ready to disclose. So it may take longer for mom or dad to reach the goal than you would expect or than you think is reasonable. And we really want to um, not hold that intention against the parents. One thing that can be really helpful is to keep the parents' view or point of view in mind. As you begin a family friend relationship, we want you to have some understanding of that to help deal with those conflicting feelings that you may be facing or experiencing. So, a parent oftentimes holds a lot of different feelings at the same time about working with families. Um, they may be dealing with challenges when it comes to trusting you and feeling comfortable responding. So, in a lot of our befriending relationships, as opposed to hosting, like we said, the crisis might not be as severe, and the family may be able to carry on though struggling without you. They're not forced to work with you the way they would be if you were hosting their child. And so it requires you as a friend to put in more effort to reach out to them, um, especially if they're having kind of this push pull about their feelings of having had to come to Safe Families for help. Um, they may also be very aware of the barriers and differences between your life and theirs. Um, these can include social, economic, race, or religious barriers, and many of the parents have been offended and disappointed many times before. So it's not surprising that they come in with a little bit of cool distance between themselves and volunteers. Um, they may have this tension between feeling both relieved and anxious. Um, they may be very glad for your help and encouragement as a family friend, but still living in the day to day reality and difficulty of whatever issues brought them to Safe Families, and that is causing a lot of stress in their lives. If they're not responding, it might just be a matter of those things are getting so big, and creating space to develop a new relationship is a challenge for all of us, right? How often do we let go of um, the kind of long-term investment self-care strategies that we know would help us, um, because they don't seem to compare to the right now immediate urgent needs around us. So that's really common for parents. And again, there's a lot of pride and vulnerability wrapped up in asking for help. And that's hard for all of us to do. So just holding that um, present in our heads. So um, there is this whole body of research called theory of change, and we're going to just skim the surface on it today with 5 points that we have found to be true about change. When you think of changes or decisions that you've made about your own life or your family, where do you turn to get most of your advice? Well, we tend to get as much, if not more, advice from our friends and family than professionals. Um, the informal support networks that we're a part of have a huge influence on how we take care of ourselves, decide what's most important, how we decide what to spend money on, or how to parent. And this can actually be really freeing to know as a family friend, because you don't need to position yourself as an expert or to know all the answers every time to have an impact in the lives of families. Instead, by focusing on your relationship with the parent and building trust and consistently responding with love and empathy, you'll become a person that they turn to for support. We also know that when it comes to changes that stick, they are the changes that we want to make, often not the ones that someone tells us to make. Like say, even if they're a doctor or a professional, we have to personally want to make the change, and we have to believe in the means of changing that we're going to use. So when a parent sets their own goals and asks for help, they are much more likely to succeed than if we or any other organization tell them what to do. And that's where this idea of self-determination really comes into play, and we're going to lean into it. Self-determination is pretty central to our identity as Americans, certainly. And even as Christians, we recognize that God has given us authority in our lives, and we strive to follow Him in our decisions for our future, recognizing that He has given us free will and the ability to make decisions. We base them under His authority, of course, but oftentimes they look different in how they play out in our lives while still honoring and glorifying Him. So you can take the examples of what kind of schooling you choose to use with your children or discipline. They all may fall under the broad authority of the Lord and how He says we're supposed to raise our children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. But the how and what it looks like for our family can be very different from one to one. So we need to be careful that we don't put more restraints on parents than we are operating under ourselves and that the Lord hasn't placed on us. Much like self-determination, parental self-monitoring lets the parent evaluate their success and needs for improvement, and that's much more effective. It doesn't get us into conflict near as much. We'll talk a bit more about that as we move forward. And then we're really going to focus on this idea of supplementary care, not substitutionary care. So we don't want to do for a parent what they can and should do for themselves. Finally, we come to this idea of recidivism versus reuse. And while some programs discourage recidivism as a negative thing, we actually encourage reuse of the Safe Families program within families. So it's a really great thing when a parent can identify that they are under considerable stress and recognize that they need help and are able to ask for it. We see it as evidence of positive change and a recognition that God has given us the body of Christ, the church family, as a gift because we need it. So the idea that once we get through this crisis, we won't need community support and prayer really contradicts the example we see in the Bible and in the gospel itself. Each of us is in ongoing need of renewed grace, and the Father continually calls and welcomes us back into relationship with Him. And we are following the example that He has set when we encourage parents to continue to come back to this gifted community. So we are going to talk a bit more about taking all of that and applying it to an empowerment approach to working with parents as they move towards their goals. This is a very simple picture of what we want to do versus what we want to avoid. We recognize that we all need help at times. As we do things for families or do things with families, we want to remember that there is a difference between helping and enabling. One is supplementary and the other is substitutionary, right? So we want to help people do what they can't do for themselves or what they don't feel equipped yet to do for themselves, build that sense of equipping rather than just taking over things that they can and should do and are able to do for themselves. Um, and some of the time, those things are in transition, right? So, a family facing a disability diagnosis for their child in the beginning may feel very unequipped to handle the stress of a evaluation or a planning meeting. And if you, as a family friend, have experience in that realm, maybe you walk through that with your own child, or you have professional experience working with disability services. um, you can come alongside them and be an advocate and a support in a way that as they move forward and become more comfortable, they're going to be able to take over and do for themselves. So, what may have started as helping then transitions into something that they're able to do for themselves. And we want to make that transition with it as well. So, when it comes to empowering parents, we don't call this section helping parents or encouraging parents, though we do those things. We call it empowering parents because we know that with the right supports and tools and relationships, these parents are fully capable and are experts in parenting their children. We want to use a strengths based approach to watch for what they do well rather than what needs improvement. So, no matter our background, whether we're privileged, wealthy, well educated, or poor, disenfranchised, or undereducated, we can struggle with feeling equipped to parent well. We can empower parents, however, by reminding them or perhaps letting them know for the very first time that they are the best parent for their child and that they are great moms and dads and that we want to support them in whatever their goals are for their family. This is a chance for us to be a cheerleader for mom and dad, and we really need to be tuned in and looking for the positive things and evidence of positive change as we're working with them. We want to look as we do this for the love that underlies their actions, even when their actions are not the ones we would have taken. We want to think about their circumstances and their context and how their behaviors reflect their love for their child. And we'll talk a little more about that in future sessions where we deal with the way context, especially context of crisis or poverty, can affect the decisions that we make. But just really keeping an eye out for the love that's underlying our relationships is going to be key. So, when it comes to how we empower and help parents, we want to focus on 3 E's. So, we recognize that all learning and change is a process. And while we may notice ways in which someone could be a better parent, feedback is not always welcome and requires building a relationship first in order for it to be received. The relationship is also what lets us see those areas for growth in context. Um, it allows us to follow Christ's example of addressing both the present needs and speaking to the heart issues or needs that are at play. We also want to look for opportunities when parents are feeling frustrated with parenting, when they may be open to trying something new or learning a new skill with their child, and step in with an encouraging word and a suggestion in those. But as we do that, we're going to keep these 3 E's: express empathy, build efficacy, and escape conflict in mind. So, before we dig too far into that, we're going to make sure we have a really clear understanding of the idea of empathy in our heads, because it can be one that we often confuse with sympathy or other things. So, this is a short video by Brene Brown, who does a lot of work on shame and resilience, and um, does a deep dive into this idea of empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So that video I just always find very helpful, especially this idea that we should resist the urge to silver lining a topic or a situation can be really helpful. And also recognizing that we're never going to have the words to make the situation better, right? We'll get into this a little bit more. But when it comes to holding empathy and expressing empathy, our real goal is to help parents feel like they are seen and understood, and that we are on their side. So, however, we want to make sure that we don't make the mistake of implying that we know exactly how a person feels, because we likely don't. I mean, we may have some sense of what it feels like to be overwhelmed or to be facing a really difficult choice, but we want to be careful that we don't imply that we know what it's like to be a single mom facing eviction, or a dad who's lost their job, if we haven't gone through that ourselves. We can empathize and express appreciation for their trust. One of the keys to that is making sure we leave space to listen without rushing to respond. And again, expressing appreciation for their trust and willingness to share. Our second E is the idea of building parents' efficacy. So efficacy, of course, relates to the word effective, the ability to produce a desired or intended result. And so we want to help mom or dad get to the place where that which seems impossible begins to feel like something they can tackle. And we can do this through non-patronizing words of praise or affirmation. So obviously we don't want to talk to parents as a child, but as a friend and equal, and point out the positives and strengths that you see in him or her. So saying something like, I love watching you with your kids. It's obvious how much you love and care for them. Or, you're such a strong woman. I'm amazed at how you handle life struggles with such grace. Or, Dad, I've seen so much growth in the way you're able to handle these challenges. Not that long ago, you sounded very overwhelmed by them. And today I hear so much more hope in your voice. And that is really encouraging. And I hope you feel good about that too. So we want to focus on strengths and change rather than on the problems that they're facing. And then finally, our third E is this idea of escaping conflict. So conflict is not actually a bad thing. In fact, it can be very helpful and is often necessary, but it should never come at the cost of a relationship. And if it does, we're probably going about it the wrong way. So as family friends, you're not in relationship with these parents in order to tell them what to do or how to get their lives together or even how to live their lives. Yes, we want kids to be safe and families intact, but we know that happens best when parents are in community, when they have friends and family to share their burdens with. So as family friends, we're here to help carry mom or dad's burdens as much as they will let us and recognize that it's an honor to do so. And we'll only get that privilege through listening and trying to understand their perspective and life experiences. We don't want parents to feel like we are just one more person, one more caseworker telling them what they have to do. They likely have enough of that already. And mom and dad aren't mandated to maintain this relationship. So we want it to be a gift and a blessing rather than a hardship or a burden or a point of stress. So the approach of taking like a caseworker or professional approach may address symptoms or byproducts of the challenges they face, but it doesn't address the hurt and the root issues of isolation. It's not a door to introduce Christ, who's the only way to fully address our ultimate needs. And so we want to hold that relationship as our priority and nurture and guide it with love and care. So when we are faced with a situation that feels like it could be teetering on, a power struggle or a conflict, we want to resist arguments. One of the ways that we do that is by being careful of the way we introduce ideas, that we don't use phrases like, you should do this because, or trust me, I've learned it, or even, what if you tried? Because those set us at odds, or set us at least in a situation where the parent has to correct or explain why that wouldn't work. And that can often lead to conflict. So instead, we're going to go back to empathy and building building efficacy in parents and looking to gain more understanding ourselves. So we might learn why a strategy seemed to be effective in the past or in the short term, and why a parent might be reaching for it, even if it doesn't seem like a good idea to us right now. There may also be opportunity for us to share what has worked with us. Now, Instead, along with this empathy, we're going to try some different strategies. So this slide is a brief summary of the idea of putting these 3 E's into practice. So when it comes to expressing empathy, one of the things I find most helpful is to approach each meeting with parents with prayer, that God would help you to listen, to trust that He is in control. We want to share the idea or the truth that abiding peace in the Lord is possible and we want to share that with parents, but often in our own nervousness or insecurities or good intentions, we are quick to jump to solutions and ideas. And that kind of undermines this idea that the Lord is in control, right? Because we're working within our own strengths and strivings. So if what we really want to communicate is the idea that we can trust the Lord, we want to be careful that our actions and our quick to jump to solutions don't counteract that. So when we jump in with solutions right off the top of our head or in that moment, what we are communicating is the idea that this problem that feels so big to parents, so overwhelming, is so simple and so easy to fix that we know the solution in that moment. Instead, we want to take the time to listen and understand fully, to empathize and express appreciation for their trust, and then to pray and think over the situation before meeting with the parent or before talking with the parent again. It can be, I think some of the time our quick to address it tendency or quick to offer a solution is because we're afraid that this opportunity is going to pass us by and we're not going to be able to offer a suggestion down the line because we'll have lost it. But really, if you think you have something helpful to bring to the situation, you can come back to the conversation with something as simple as on your next visit with the parent saying, that thing you shared last week has really been on my heart. How are things going? And just by that really simple reintroduction of the idea, you can gain more information. You've expressed the fact that this parent is dear enough to you and their situation is important enough to you that you have considered it, and you reopen the door to that conversation. When it comes to this idea of building parents' efficacy, I go back to this training that I was in years ago where they were trying to get us to use an empowerment mindset. And I think it stuck with me so much because God always seems to speak to me through metaphors in the garden. And in this training, the leader presented the question of, when you're working in your garden, what's the most effective way to control weeds? So, of course, there were lots of answers. Some people suggested using a weed blocker, or make sure you weed a little bit every day and that way it'll stay under control, or you can mulch it. Everyone had some idea, right? But the trainer's answer was really simple. She said that what you do is you plant more flowers. And when you fill up the space with good things, things that you want to see grow, they crowd out the weeds, and you're not spending your time just pulling up surface evidence of problems. This really applies, I think, to our relationships and to the way we engage with parents. We want to encourage their interests and their priorities and the good things and strengths that we see in them, rather than just putting safeguards in place or trying to stay on top of surface decisions. Of course, there's going to be things that we all are struggling with and need to weed out, but I'm reminded of something Jackie Hill Perry said, which was that when we just are addressing sin or poor decision making, we're really missing the heart of the gospel, which is that the thing that changes our lives is when we hold out the hope that no matter what it is that God is asking us to give up or change, He's going to replace it with more of Himself, and that will be more worthwhile, that will be more of a blessing than that thing that we are giving up. And so, as we encourage parents along their goals and their priorities, we can really encourage them to lean into their strengths and also be presenting God as the ultimate bringer of good fruit. So, we also know that when we're looking for strengths and signs of progress and things to praise, that we have to keep in mind the context and that we're assuming loving intent. Like I said, we're going to talk more about that when it comes to our dive next session into poverty and vulnerable situations. And then finally, when it comes to this idea of escaping conflict, one thing that I'd encourage you to try is to use this idea of an I wonder statement. So, when you've come to a point in your relationship where you feel like you have an idea to introduce, or mom has expressed frustration in a situation, whether it's parenting or as they're working towards their goal, you can introduce a thought or a suggestion through an I wonder statement. So an I wonder statement sounds something like, I wonder what would happen if, or if it's dealing with a parenting thing, it could be something like, I wonder if there's a pattern to Johnny's sleep problems. If they're dealing with a struggle towards their goal, I wonder if there's someone locally that could help with that situation. And the beauty of an I wonder statement is that even if you know of an agency or a strategy, phrasing it this way as I wonder what or I wonder if allows the parent to share their own experiences with that line of thought without contradicting you. Maybe they also know of an agency, but they have experienced a lot of hurdles in accessing that service, or they haven't noticed a pattern yet, but you're introducing the concept of it. It's a way for them to share their information without contradicting you, which is the start of those conflicts, right? And power struggles that we deal with. It also really presents this situation and this suggestion as something that you guys can discover together, so that they can feel more effective, more self-determination and ownership over the change and the progress that they're making. And it sets you guys as a team and as equals who are problem solving together. So I have found this I wonder statement concept really to be transformative in my work with parents and in my work with kids of whatever age you're dealing with. Being able to say, I wonder what would happen, or I wonder what it'll be like, is a really low pressure way to handle these situations. So there will almost certainly be times when you think that mom or dad should have done more or gone further than they have in a certain period of time. Please remember that you're there for a reason, number one, and that reason is to develop relationships. Our assignment is a success, if for no other reason than because we obediently reached out to our neighbor in love, and we believe that God is going to use our service for His good and His kingdom, no matter how that outcome looks to us, or whether or not we're still in the picture when that fruit ripens and comes to fruition. It's also to help to keep in mind that there may be deeper problems that are preventing success, or a new unexpected problem, or that we're just not seeing the progress that's being made. Lots of internal steps are needed to change. First, we have to recognize the need for change, formulate plans, choose and act, and reassess. And all of those steps are really valuable, especially for parents who are learning more um, healthy habits of decision making. We don't want to rush that progress. And that those steps, while being evidence of real progress, aren't always something that we can see from the outside. So, for many parents, a willingness to trust, to feel seen and loved is in and of itself monumental progress. That's not to say that we don't reassess goals, and your family coach is an excellent resource here. But our goal is not the parent reaching whatever goal they've set. Our goal as family friends is to build a successful friendship with the parent, one where they feel trusted and encouraged, so that 3 years from now, when life gets hard again, that parent recognizes their need for help and feels safe and comfortable coming to us. And as we talk about our goals and progress, it's important to remember that our goal for parents is that they be good enough parents. It is hard enough to be super mom or super dad when everything's going right in life, when we have a supportive spouse and a good job and secure housing and strong extended family relationships and a great education, and on and on. When we present that as an option or possibility, we're often doing it really in a place of pride and comparison and searching for satisfaction in ourselves and in this world. The idea that we can be super mom or super dad in and of ourselves. And again, it undermines the truth of our daily need for the Lord. So when a parent's dealing with crisis or multiple crises that are beyond their control, our goal is for them to be good enough parents and to give them the tools and support necessary to be able to deal with those situations while caring for their children. Good enough, meaning that they're buffering that stress for their child, that they're able to maintain a safe home for their child, even if it looks different than what we or probably they would love to be able to provide. So, we are going to watch one more brief clip today. This is an example of where a therapist employed the 3 E's with a mom who was going through a time of crisis and helped her to recognize the ways in which the areas where she thought she was failing in were actually evidence of her love and care for her kids and were good enough and protective enough of her children to really be worthy of praise and appreciation. Sorry about that. Wrong screen. Let's see. Here we go.
I decided to film in my car today because it is so quiet in here. I kind of love it. So I know that a lot of you parents feel inadequate at times or carry guilt about things. So I wanted to share with you a personal story that I'm hoping will help. I'm taking you back now 10 years ago. I was newly divorced with 2 little kids, a 2 and a 3-year-old. I was obviously overwhelmed, completely broke. Food stamps, sharing a bedroom with my children. Couldn't even afford my own bed, so I slept on the floor next to my kids' bunk beds. And I was really depressed. I mean, really, I was not in a good place. And as all that isn't bad enough, I had a few people in my life making me feel like a horrible mom, which doesn't help when you already feel like a complete loser, right? So I end up with some free therapy sessions. And I'm talking to my therapist one day, and I tell him that I feel like I've become just a crappy mother. And he asks for some examples. So I tell him, well, before my divorce, I used to cook these from scratch, nutritious meals for my kids. And now I just cook something out of a box. And before my divorce, I used to take my kids everywhere. We used to go to parks and museums. And now a lot of days I just stick them in front of the TV, sometimes for hours, so that I can hide in the bedroom and cry. And I went on and on with these examples, obviously knowing that he's thinking, wow, she's really deteriorated as a mom. And when I was done, he looked at me so genuinely and he said, wow, Christina, you are an amazing mom. Sorry. He said, you are at your rock bottom. You are in a really bad place. You still make sure that the needs of your children are met. You still take the time to go buy that box and boil that pasta. You are so depressed, but you don't want them seeing that all the time, so you stick them in front of their favorite cartoons so they can laugh and be entertained while you hide in the bedroom and cry by yourself. That is so selfless. He literally, he took every single bad thing I said about myself and he turned it around and showed me that maybe I wasn't so bad of a mom. Maybe I was just doing the best I could under the circumstances. Listen, I know that we parents want to be extraordinary parents every single day, but there are days when we're just going to be okay parents. And you know what? That's great. That's good enough. So when you're feeling inadequate and you're beating yourself up over little things, do for yourself what that therapist did for me that day. And tell that inner critical voice to take a seat and zip it.
So I think an important takeaway from that video is the idea that that therapist didn't sugarcoat the situation. They weren't trying to say that everything was fine, but the therapist was seeing the love that underlied her behavior, or not behavior, the things she was doing for her kids. And so if we can get into the habit and the mindset of looking for that, of assuming love driving our behaviors, just the way we would want people to assume love driving our behaviors as parents, then we're going to be much more gracious and much more effective in building our relationships with parents. So that's it for this session. And as always, if you have questions or want more information, please feel free to reach out to your family coaches or your ministry lead. And we would be happy to come alongside you so that you're not serving in isolation, and help to talk through the questions that you come up with. So have a great day.